Welcome to Redacted Realms, where the shadows of history whisper their darkest truths. They were never supposed to find the room. They were never supposed to open that door. And the truth is, neither are you. But here you are listening. And I need you to understand something. After this, you will never see the world the same way again. Because once a man stares into the shadows that hide behind faith, behind family, behind everything we call civilization, the shadows stare back. In the autumn of 1965, a family of four vanished from the village of Ashworth, Yorkshire. No ransom notes, no bodies, just silence, like they had been swallowed whole by the land itself. For 3 months, the locals searched every inch of those rolling hills. The newspapers called it a tragic mystery, the kind England breeds so well, and then the case faded, at least in public. But here's the secret no one told you. 3 months later, they found something. Beneath St. Mary's Church, under 20 feet of stone older than Christianity itself, lay a hidden chamber. Inside, the Higgins family's belongings, neatly arranged, their clothes, their photographs, and a journal that spoke of rites the church had banned hundreds of years ago, rites whispered to grant power, dominion, and knowledge no man was meant to hold. The last entry was dated 2 weeks after the family disappeared. Now, ask yourself, how does a dead family keep writing? For nearly 60 years, the church has refused to speak about what was found. The chamber is sealed, the files buried under layers of official secrecy, and the cottage where the Higgins lived, it still stands on Church Lane, its windows blind with dust, its doors bolted from the inside. The people of Ashworth cross themselves when they pass it. They never look directly at it. They know something they'll never admit. But what makes this story more than a ghost tale? What drags it into the realm of terror is what came after. Because in 1985, when sealed church records were finally unclassified under pressure from the Historical Commission, investigators discovered this wasn't the first family to vanish under St. Mary's. Watch, there were others stretching back. Centuries, different names, different generations, but always the same pattern, gone without a trace, always tied to the church. And when you see what they all had in common, you'll understand why this case is not about one missing family. It's about something older, deeper, a system designed to feed on obedience, secrecy, and blood. Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you doesn't just explain the Higgins family, it explains why men kneel when they should stand, why nations bow to invisible hands, why power always hides behind the altar. You were never supposed to hear this, but you're here now, and that means you've already taken the first step. Ashworth was a village built on bones, 8 centuries of stone cottages crouched among the moors, like old sentinels. It was the kind of place where time moved differently, where bloodlines ran thicker than rivers, and where traditions weren't written, because they didn't need to be. Everyone knew their role. Everyone understood what silence cost and what it bought. At the center of this timeless ritual stood St. Mary's Church, massive, monolithic, its tower stabbing the sky like an iron crucifix, built in 1187 on the ruins of something older, something the church itself could never fully erase. Because here's a truth the priests will never admit: Christianity didn't conquer paganism, it buried it. And like all buried things, it waited. The church doors were oak and iron, blackened by centuries, creaking in winds that seemed to speak. The bells rang as they always had, but in the autumn of 1965, something changed. The sound deepened, thickened. Villagers swore the bells rang at night when no man pulled the ropes, their tones crawling from underground like voices long forgotten. And under that mournful peal, the fog came rolling down from the moors, curling around gravestones, clinging to walls like a living thing. This was the season the Higgins family began to unravel. Thomas Higgins was a man of order, postmaster, church warden, the kind of man who trusted systems because he believed in structure. His faith was quiet but firm, the bedrock of a Yorkshire life. His wife, Ella, yes, that name will matter later, was different. Beautiful, curious, restless. She kept gardens of herbs no modern housewife needed, grew flowers whose names the old women remembered, but never spoke aloud. She read books that whispered of things England pretended to forget. Their children, Margaret, 12, thoughtful beyond her years, and Billy, 8, The golden child with a laugh that could warm stone changed first. Margaret began writing about the old truths. Billy drew symbols no one recognized, spirals, eyes, and figures cloaked in robes that curved around an altar. When his teacher asked what it meant, he said, "It's what Mommy and Mr. Whitmore showed me." Mr. Whitmore, Reverend Harold Whitmore, vicar of St. Mary's for 23 years, a man who preached Christ with one hand and hoarded older scriptures with the other. His sermons grew stranger each year, talk of deeper mysteries, older covenants, truths beneath truths. The villagers called it eccentric, but eccentricity does not breed secret chambers. Eccentricity does not make families disappear. And here's the part no one writes in polite reports. The Reverend wasn't working alone. Beneath the hymns and harvest festivals, Ashworth had always kept its circle, old families, old bloodlines, guarding rituals older than Rome. They called it heritage. They called it preservation. But what they preserved was power. The Higgins family didn't just vanish. They were taken. And not by force, not at first. Because this is how control works. It doesn't break the door, it invites you in. It whispers that you belong to something greater, that the chains are bracelets, that the darkness is light if only you open your eyes. Ella Nena opened hers first. She joined what the village called a historical society, a harmless name. For a thing without a name, they said they studied folklore. They said they read old manuscripts, and they did by candlelight, in rooms where no sunlight reached, speaking words not heard for 800 years. The Reverend told them the church had stolen something that the first priests came not to save, but to silence, to bury knowledge that once made men as gods. And he was right about one thing. They buried it deep, beneath churches, beneath dogma, beneath the bones of those who would not kneel. But some men dig. The society began reenactments. At first simple, harmless, seasonal feasts, herb craft, old songs. But rituals grow like roots. The deeper they go, the harder they pull. Soon, the gatherings moved underground into a room Reverend Whitmore claimed to have discovered. During repairs, a room carved from rock before England had a name. And what they did there, what the Higgins children saw, would scar their drawings forever. This is where we begin, with a locked door beneath a Norman church, a door no man opens, without leaving something behind. And if you keep listening, you will understand what they left. They say the chamber beneath St. Mary's was discovered by accident. But accidents, in stories like this, are never real accidents. They are inevitabilities, doors that have waited centuries. For the right hands, according to official records, Reverend Whitmore claimed he found the entrance while inspecting the crypt, after noticing a crack in the north transept wall, a simple repair job. That's the story the church signed off on. But when you read the witness statements, the ones buried in the archives, you notice the cracks in that story are wider than any wall. The sexton, an old man named Barrow, told investigators that he saw Whitmore in the church at night, alone. No lamps, no tools, just standing before the altar with his hands pressed flat to the stone like he was listening for something inside it. Barrow said the vicar spoke in whispers, not prayers, not scripture, but something older, heavier. He said the words made his teeth ache, like they were scraping against the roots of his skull. Of course, when the commission questioned Whitmore, he laughed it off, said the sexton had been drinking, said people see ghosts when they want to. But there's a pattern with men like Whitmore. They explain everything except the silence that follows them. The chamber wasn't a room. It was a wound, a gash torn through the earth by hands that believed stone could hold eternity. The stairs descended in a tight spiral, narrow as a coffin shaft, slick with centuries of damp. Each step was worn, cupped like a palm, as if thousands of feet had passed that way long before the church was ever built. And at the bottom, 32 steps down, according to the survey logs, was a door. Iron hinges, oak blackened by time, no handle on the outside. When they pried it open, the air that came out was thick as oil. Dead air that had slept for so long it had forgotten what light was. Barrow said it tasted like blood and salt. The inspector wrote metallic odor in his report. But that word does nothing to capture what Barrow felt in his bones when the darkness exhaled. The first men who entered that chamber left in silence. No jokes, no words, just the sound of their boots on stone as they climbed back to the world above. Their faces drained, their eyes refusing to meet anyone else's. The records say nothing of what they saw that day, but something followed them. Out, you can hear it in the way their statements fracture, in the way their handwriting changes between the first page and the last, letters tightening like a noose, ink pressed so hard it cuts the paper. When the official report finally emerged, it said the chamber was an early medieval ossuary, nothing more than a bone vault. For plague dead, it recommended sealing the entrance immediately for public health reasons. But the photographs, the ones that never saw daylight, tell a different story. They show a room carved from living rock, every inch covered in symbols. Spirals interlocked with eyes, figures standing in circles, hands raised not in prayer but command, and in the center a stone table, black and polished, as if fire had licked it smooth. Around its edges, grooves ran like veins, leading down to a channel carved into the floor, a channel that ended in a hollow basin. You don't need imagination to know what it was for. The bones weren't thrown in a heap. They were arranged, carefully, lovingly, skulls set in arcs, long bones laid in spirals that echoed the symbols. On the walls, and here's the detail that will never leave you, every skull had its jaw shattered, deliberately, as if someone wanted to silence the dead even after death. Now ask yourself, who silences the dead? Who fears what they might say? The journal, the one found beside the Higgins belongings, sat on that stone table when they entered. Its pages were damp, the ink blurred, but the words were still legible in places. The first entries were harmless enough, notes about village life, the weather, Margaret's schooling. But as the days passed, the tone shifted. Phrases crept in like mold, the old names, the watchers beneath, the covenant deeper than Christ. At first, Elalanena wrote of them with curiosity, and antiquarians delight at local folklore. But curiosity is a door that never closes. By mid-October, her words were fevered. She wrote of voices under the church, voices that spoke through dreams, promising revelation. She wrote of rites older than Rome, older than law, older than death. And then came the drawings, spirals like billies, figures in robes, circles carved with runes that looped like serpents devouring their own tails. The last page bore only one sentence, written so violently the pen tore through. The door opens from both sides. After that, nothing, but the entries were dated up to November 12th, 2 weeks after the Higgins were reported missing, 2 weeks after every villager swore they'd vanished without a trace. So tell me who was writing? Whitmore, of course, denied everything. He said he'd never seen the journal, said he had no knowledge of any chamber before that day, and yet his handwriting appears in the margins of 3 pages. Questions, notes, cross-references to scripture twisted into knots of meaning they were never meant to hold. Lines from Leviticus rewritten into riddles, a single phrase in Latin, repeated again and again. Sanguis state clavis. Blood is the key dot now. Here is where the story splits what the church claims and what the whispers say. Officially, the chamber was sealed within a week, filled with concrete, locked away forever. But the photographs, I've seen the ones, stamped with dates, 3 months later, show candles burning on that stone table, fresh wax, fresh shadows, which means someone went back. Why? To answer that, you have to understand something about power. It doesn't vanish when it's buried. It ferments, it grows potent. And men like Whitmore, they smell it like wolves scent blood on snow. They know the difference between superstition and systems. A charm is nothing, a rite is nothing, but a belief shared, repeated, codified, that's a machine older than any empire, grinding flesh into obedience and calling it salvation. The rites weren't about worship, they were about hierarchy, about proving who could command and who would kneel. The sacrifice wasn't offered to a god, it was offered to the system itself, to keep its gears greased with fear. And this is where the Higgins fit. They weren't victims in the way the newspapers framed it. They weren't dragged screaming into that dark. They walked, willingly, at first. Because this is how control works. It seduces. It tells you you've been chosen, that your bloodline carries a secret destiny, that you're not like the others, you're more. Elalanena wanted that. She wanted meaning, and meaning is the sharpest hook in the world. I believe Whitmore showed her something that proved the old rites weren't just stories. Maybe a fragment, a relic. Maybe he let her hear the voices for herself. Maybe he told her what I'm about to tell you, that the church didn't build St. Mary's to honor Christ. They built it to cage something, you see. The foundation stones, archaeologists dated them to the 9th century. But the chamber walls? They're older, Roman, no, pre-Roman, Britannic. Carved with symbols scholars still can't translate because they're not a language, they're a code, a geometry of belief. And when they mapped the layout of that chamber, they found something chilling. Its dimensions match the ratios of certain sacred sites. In the Levant, sites associated not with worship but with summoning. Summoning what? No one will say. Not in the reports, not in the whispers. But I can tell you what the villagers said when they thought no one was listening. They said the fog wasn't weather, it was breath. They said the bells didn't ring by themselves, they were answering. They said if you stood in the graveyard at midnight, you could feel the ground throb under your feet like a heartbeat. And here's what chills me most. When the chamber was opened, every compass in the church went mad. Needles spinning, clocks stalling, candles burning cold blue like gaslight. The inspector wrote localized magnetic anomaly. A neat little phrase for something that made grown men piss themselves in the dark. So what did Whitmore want? The same thing men like him have always wanted. To master what masters them. To climb one rung higher on the ladder of power, even if it means standing on a pile of skulls. He wanted the covenant the old texts promised, dominion over flesh and fate. And for that he needed blood. Not just any blood. Blood bound to the land by generations. Blood that had roots. The Higgins were perfect. And here's the detail you won't read anywhere else. Ella Nena wasn't born Higgins. Her maiden name was Rook, one of the oldest families in Ashworth. A family that kept certain books, certain heirlooms, long after others burned theirs. A family whose women were whispered to carry the gift. The old blood. Margaret wrote something in her school essay a week before they vanished. The assignment was simple. What I want to be when I grow up. Her answer was one sentence. I want to be awake when the black sun rises. The teacher underlined it in red. Wrote see me after class. Margaret never did. 2 nights later, the Higgins were gone. Higgins were gone. The records stop where the earth begins to remember what men wish it would forget. Everything beyond this point survives only in fragments, notes smuggled into letters, phrases scratched in margins, the broken chronology of fear. And yet, if you piece them together, if you follow the trail of ink like blood spatter on stone, you begin to see the shape of what happened in those final weeks. It starts with Whitmore's handwriting tightening into claws. His early sermons, those still archived in diocesan folders, speak of mercy, grace, the usual velvet rope of theology. But by late October, his marginalia shifts tone. Words like submission and threshold recur, underlined, sometimes circled in red. And then, one night, in a ledger meant for parish accounts, he wrote this instead of numbers. The mouth opens, the tongue is stone, speak, and the stone shall sing. The language is wrong. Not Latin, not Greek, not any tongue that lingers. In libraries, some believe he was quoting from an oral tradition older than the alphabet. Something passed in whispers, unmoored from grammar, carried like a contagion through time. That same week, 2 villagers went missing: Jonas Kettle and his sister, Ruth. They were last seen near the ash trees by the old Roman road, gathering kindling. The search parties found nothing, but Ruth's shawl snagged on a thorn, its wool damp, as though something had breathed on it. The constable blamed vagrants. The vicar spoke of wolves, though no wolf had roamed these hills for 2 centuries. The villagers locked their doors before dusk, and in the Higgins journal, yes, the journal we've spoken of before, Ella Nena wrote, it begins with the chosen. Blood calls blood. The old pact stirs like a serpent in winter. Why did she call them chosen? What covenant was she answering to? Some say Whitmore lured her into the chamber. Others claim she sought it out herself, drawn by dreams that spilled into daylight. Either way, by the first week of November, she was gone from her own house for hours each night. Margaret too. Barrow swore he saw them slip into the church long after the bells had ceased. He followed once, only once, and what he heard from the nave turned his spine to glass, chanting, Not the soft murmur of prayer, but a rhythm older than psalms, grinding like millstones in the dark. He told the inspector it sounded like teeth-biting words when asked why he didn't go further. Barrow said this: "There's a silence after chanting stops, like the whole earth holds its breath. And in that breath, something waits for you to move first." Now here is where the story darkens beyond the reach of reason. On November 12th, the last date in the journal, the vicar called for an unscheduled midnight service, no record of. It exists in the parish calendar, but 17 villagers vanished that night, and their names appear nowhere in burial ledgers. Entire bloodlines excised like a surgeon cutting out rot. Doors stood open to cold rooms. Fires guttered in hearths. Half-sewn clothes draped over chairs, the needles still threaded. It was as if life paused mid-motion and never resumed. The chamber, when it was found weeks later, bore signs of what transpired. Candles fused to the stone table in waxen tumors. The basin in the floor brimming with a substance black as pitch. Though tests showed no trace of ash, no trace of wood, only iron and salt, and something else the report never named but tagged as organic residue human. Around the basin sprawled robes of undyed wool, stiff with old damp, yet warm to the touch when lifted, as though the stone itself had a pulse that lingered in their folds. And carved into the table's edge, letters freshly cut: Navissimus Ortis, the last rising. Does it mean resurrection, apocalypse, or something subtler, the blooming of an ancient seed long dormant in the marrow of this land here? Is the peace that haunts me? Among those robes lay Margaret's ribbon, crimson satin, frayed at one end, darkened by stains that bloomed outward like flowers pressed too long in a book. They never found her body, but they found a handprint on the underside of the stone table, small, delicate, the print of someone who tried to push their way back to the light or deeper down, into whatever void yawns beyond that chamber dot. And this brings us to the Black Sun. Ella Nena spoke of it first in her fevered script, but the symbol itself predates her by centuries. You can see it on the wall behind the altar in the old church paintings. Though varnish and candle soot blur its edges, a dark disk ringed by jagged gold. At first glance, it looks like an eclipse, but the rays are wrong. They curl inward, not out, as if the light is being devoured rather than spilled. The same emblem appears on coins minted during the reign of King Egbert, when pestilence haved the shires, and again, scratched into the lintel stones of cottages abandoned during the Great Hunger. Each time it surfaces, something follows: famine, plague, war, or perhaps those were the offerings required to keep it sated. What does it signify? Not the absence of light, but its reversal, a sun that shines inward, pulling everything toward its core. The ancients called it Atrum Sol, the devouring dawn. To be awake when the black sun rises is to witness the inversion of nature, the hour when all boundaries collapse, life into death, self into void, will into obedience. And this is what the rites sought: not worship, not supplication, but alignment, to make human flesh resonate with that inward pull, to let the bones hum with the same frequency as the abyss. The chants were not prayers, they were calibrations, and blood the iron, the salt, the heat was the fuel that greased the mechanism of becoming. If this sounds abstract, let me root it in something visceral. When the forensic team descended, weeks later, their equipment failed. Batteries bled dry in minutes, cameras jammed, voices on the radios stretched and warped, syllables folding backward on themselves like metal dragged through magnets. One man, a constable named Harrow, collapsed at the threshold, clutching his skull. Later, in hospital, he muttered a single phrase over and over until his tongue split: "It's under the tongue. It's under the tongue." Doctors said seizure. The inspector said stress. But when they pried open his mouth, they found symbols carved into the flesh beneath, the same spirals from the chamber walls, etched deep, burned, not cut, as if his own saliva carried fire. The chamber was sealed after that. Concrete poured thick as winter fog. The church deconsecrated, left to rot, ivy clawing its stones like green veins. But silence is not absence. The ground remembers. The wind remembers. And sometimes when the mist rolls low and the bells in neighboring parishes toll without hands, those who live near the ruins say they hear singing, not from above, but below, a sound like voices braided into one endless breath. And those who hear it too long, they begin to draw spirals, in margins, on walls, on their own skin. Some of the missing were never found. Others, well, parts of them surfaced years later when the river coughed up bones slick as glass, as if water had polished them for centuries. No marrow left, no teeth, just hollows where words might once have formed. Do you see the shape now? Do you understand why they shattered the jaws of the dead in that first chamber? Speech is power. Names are levers, and silence is the only lock strong enough to hold what waits when the door opens from both sides. But here's the question that claws me awake at night. If the chamber was truly sealed, if the rites were broken, why did the photographs taken this year show fresh carvings in the concrete spirals deep enough to blister the stone? Why did the soil tests detect iron concentrations 40 times higher than baseline? And why, in the margins of a modern geology report, did someone using Whitmore's looping hand write this? The mouth opens, the tongue is stone. Speak, and the stone shall sing. It's happening again. The pattern is stirring. Like a serpent under frost, the names of the vanished will grow. And somewhere a child is already dreaming of a black sun rising. Because thresholds are patient, and doors never truly forget which side they were meant to open toward. You would think the world forgot that concrete and neglect were enough to bury what men once called holy. But time is not a river. It's a wheel, and wheels turn whether we watch them or not. When the first reports reached me, I thought they were coincidence shadows cast by superstition. But then the coincidences began to rhyme. It started with a survey team dispatched to evaluate the stability of the old church grounds. The county planned to convert the ruins into a heritage site, a quaint nod to local history for tourists, hungry for rustic decay. They wanted pathways and interpretive plaques, gift shops peddling miniature bells and tea towels printed with medieval floor plans. They did not expect the soil to bleed. Not literally, not at first. What they noticed was iron staining, seeping upward through the clay after a week of rain. At first, they thought rusted nails, corroded pipes. Then they scraped deeper. There were no nails, no pipes, nothing but earth shot through with veins the color of old blood. That alone would not have made headlines, but the smell did. Harrowing doesn't cover it. The stench clawed its way into their clothes, their mouths, their thoughts of sweetness, almost floral, rotting beneath the sweetness. Until one man said it felt like being kissed by something dead. They stopped the dig after 2 workers collapsed from nausea. One never woke. When the coroner opened his body, they found his lungs filmed with a residue black as bitumen, slick enough to gum the scalpel. His throat bore no lesions. His stomach was clear. Whatever invaded him had bypassed the ordinary doors and taken the shortest road to breath. The report suggested environmental contamination, spores, mold, but no culture grew in the petri dishes. And under the microscope the residue did not behave like any organic matter. Catalogued in modern science, it refracted light inward, pulling illumination toward its heart until the lens seemed to darken at the core. I saw those slides. I wish I hadn't. Looking into them was like staring into an eclipse through glass. Your eye knows it's wrong, but it can't look away. And when you do, the afterimage lingers, blooming like frost across your sight. After that, they sealed the site again. Temporary measure, they said, but rumors root quickly, especially in soil this damp with history. Workers muttered about voices under the ground, about something knocking from below when the augers churned. They said the knocks weren't random. They answered back, like numbers counted in an alien tongue. I didn't believe it, not fully, until the photographs surfaced. Not leaked, no. Delivered, slipped under my door in a brown envelope. No return address. Postmark smudged into oblivion. 6 images, black and white, grain like ash. The first showed the church foundation scoured of ivy, the old threshold bare. The second closer caught the concrete seal fractured down its center like a wound splitting under pressure. In the third, the fissure widened into a gash, its edges puckered as if the stone were flesh parting under invisible hands. The last 3 I struggle to name. They are not of this world, or perhaps too much of it. Spirals etched deep into the floor, fresh and wet, gleaming like something newly molted. A basin brimming with fluid thick enough to hold its own reflection. Though in the photo that reflection does not match the chamber walls. And then, oh God, the final image, a figure, half crouched, back to the lens, naked or shrouded in something too thin to be cloth. Its spine bowed like a question mark written in bone. The head turned slightly, as if listening, or smiling. No. Note accompanied the photographs. Only a fragment of handwriting scrawled on the back of the last print. It's not sealed. It was never sealed. I should have burned them. I should have salted the ashes and scattered them in a river that runs too fast for memory to cling. Instead, I took them to the university archives, thinking scholarship could armor me, thinking language, the cold scalpel of etymology, could cut out the cancer of dread blooming in my marrow. That's when the dreams began. They came slow at first, a drip feed of images sliding through sleep's cracked teeth, corridors slick, with something that pulsed like muscle, voices chanting in a rhythm that braided with my own breath until I woke choking on syllables I could not swallow back. Each night the dream stretched longer, the chamber drawing closer, until one dawn I woke with soil under my nails and a taste of iron clinging to my tongue like foil. I traced the word novissimus ortis again and again, hoping repetition could blunt its edge, but the more I said it, the less it sounded like Latin. The vowels shifted in my mouth, bending, breaking, until it curled into something that hissed when spoken aloud, something that left frost blooming on the mirror when I whispered it at dawn. Or meanwhile, the disappearances began. First the surveyor Harland, a man with a limp and a laugh like gravel, gone from his flat, kettle left boiling, slippers by the door. Then two students sent to document the ruins for a heritage thesis. Their car was found abandoned by the hedgerows, doors yawning open, seats slick with dew though the sky had been clear for weeks, the engine still warm. Of the students, nothing except a notebook in the grass, its pages crawling with spirals so tight they bled through to the other side. The local papers muttered about cults, vagrants, the usual tinder for gossip, but in the pub, where tongues wag loose as unlatched gates, they whispered of old debts being called, of something under the hill flexing like a sleeper stretching. After centuries of dark, I told myself not to go back, told myself 1,000 times, but obsession is a tide that pulls whether you wait or not. And so, on the night the moon swelled full as a blister, I drove out along the Roman road, past hedges twisted like arthritic fingers, until the spire rose against the sky like a blackened tooth, the church crouched in ruin, its stones gnawed by ivy, windows socketed with shadow. The air tasted wrong thick, as if sound itself curdled in it. I crossed the nave by torchlight, dust swirling like ash, the beam catching shapes in corners that twitched when I turned my head. The threshold gaped at the chancel's end, the concrete fissured wide enough now to breathe, and from that breath a draught, warm and sweet, carrying the stink of flowers long dead. I told myself to turn back. Instead, I pressed my hand to the crack. The stone pulsed under my palm, not metaphor, not madness. It moved slow, rhythmic, like something remembering the shape of a heartbeat. And then, oh God, then the whisper came, not in my ears, but inside the drum of my skull, soft as cloth torn and dark. You have always been coming here. I dropped the torch. Its beam swung wild, flaring across the walls, and there they were. The spirals, fresh, wet, quivering, as though inked in something still alive. I don't recall lowering myself through the gap. One moment I was staring at it. The next my boots struck stone slick with condensation. The air clung thick, pressing close like damp wool. My breath plumed in bursts that curled and vanished as if swallowed whole. And a headlight, faint, gold, trembling like a candle cupped in trembling hands. I followed. Of course I followed. The chamber opened wide as a cathedral hollowed from bone. Pillars hunched like vertebrae, ribs of stone arching overhead, and in the center the table, vast as an altar, its surface black with stains that glimmered like oil. Around it lay shapes draped in fabric pale as shrouds, though some shifted when the air stirred, as if breath lingered in their folds. And the singing, oh Christ, the singing, not loud, not even melodic, a single note, low and endless, threading through the dark like wire. It wasn't outside me. It was in my marrow, my teeth, setting them humming like tuning forks. I tried to speak, to ask who was there, but my tongue clung to my palate, thick as clay. And then movement, Behind the altar, a figure rising slow as smoke, tall, impossibly thin. Its head wreathed in something like hair but moving, writhing, tasting the air. It spoke without mouth or breath. "We are the door." My knees buckled, my skull filled with spirals, turning, drilling inward until thought unspooled like threads snapped from a spindle. I felt hands, dozens, maybe hundreds, press against my skin, not from without but within, as though my bones were gloves being drawn on by something vast and patient. And through the blackness blooming at the edges of sight, I saw it rising. Behind the figure, behind all of them, a disk vast as night, rimmed with fire curling inward. A sun swallowing its own light, the black sun dot, and then I understood. The pack was never broken. The seal was never meant to hold. It was a hinge, a joint, a mouth waiting for its tongue. Waiting for me, waiting for me. There's no waking from this. I know that now, not because I am dreaming, but because the dream has swollen until it is everything. And the world I once called real is nothing, but a pale rind peeling away from its core. The black sun does not rise or set. It opens, its rim curls like lips unstitching, and behind them what waits cannot be called light, nor darkness, but something vast enough to hold both like toys forgotten in a cavern. That thing, oh, that thing moved without moving, a pressure, blooming outward, folding the chamber into itself. I feel it grip me, not with hands but with inevitability, drawing me like a bead along a thread strung from my own marrow. The figure speaks again, or perhaps it is the sun, or the chorus of shrouded things hunched like broken saints round the altar. No mouths move, yet the sound floods me, searing the soft meat of thought until words crack and spill meaning raw and molten. We are the hinge, you are the hand, and then the chamber tilts. Not in the ordinary sense. There is no axis here, no floor or ceiling, only planes sloughing into one another like skin melting from bone. My stomach lurches, my bones hum. The spirals etched in the walls glow, lines pulsing, twisting tighter, pulling my gaze until it knots itself inside them. And in their depths I see, not with eyes. Eyes are too small for this. I see with something vaster, something that stretches across centuries like a shadow drawn thin and trembling. I see the monks scratching their parchments by candlelight, their faces hollowed by fasting and fear. I see the inquisitors burning sigils into oak, thinking fire could cauterize a wound that was never flesh. I see the builders pouring lime into the cracks, whispering prayers that taste like lies even as they leave their lips. And through it all, the black sun gleams behind their eyelids, patient as rot. A voice wins through the vision, threading past ear and nerve into the root of self. You thought you came here alone. Shapes rise from the floor, no, not shapes, not truly, impressions. Dense in the fabric of perception, where something presses from the other side. They shiver, swell, burst like blisters, and from each oozes a form slick and glistening, pale, as underbellies of fish. They slough forward on limbs too many and too thin, their joints bending like reeds underwater. And their faces, God help me, their faces are almost human, almost. Eyes nested where cheeks should bloom, mouths flowering sideways, teeth like milk glass beads. They circle me, not close, never close, always just far enough for me to hope. They'll stop there, but hope is a blade dulled on both edges. It cuts coming and going. One leans forward or folds forward, or perhaps it never had a spine to bend and presses something like a hand to my chest. I feel not touch but absence, like heat drawn out in a single rush. My heart stutters, my breath knots, and in that instant, I know they are reading me, peeling through the pages of my life with a care almost tender, childhood scraped raw under, winter skies, fingers ink-stained in the archives, nights spent hunched over texts that whispered when the wind was wrong, all of it spilling into them, a stream drinking itself, and then laughter, soft, almost kind, the laughter of someone who has found what they were looking for. The black sun swells, its rim fractures into spokes, and from the spokes unfurl tendrils, blacker than black, yet limned with a radiance that scalds the thought of color. They uncoil slow, tasting the air, tasting me. One brushes the altar, stone runs like wax. Another curls through a pillar. The pillar groans, splits, becomes a tower of teeth blooming like fungus. The chanting, O Christ, the chanting. It is, not in any tongue spoken by men, but I know it. How do I know it? It crawls through my throat before I can stop it, syllables like knives slipping between my teeth. I choke them out, each one a hook dragging me deeper, until my voice is not my own, but a thread in a tapestry vast enough to smother stars. And then the altar cracks. It does not break as stone should. It splits like an egg, halves peeling back, wetly, and from its yolk rises something that should not fit in any world built on Euclid's bones. It towers, though there is no height here, only magnitude. An architecture of hunger draped in veils of skin that shimmer like oil on water. Where its head should bloom, there's only an orifice gaping wide, rimmed with cilia that writhe as if, tasting the edges of thought. I fall, not backward, not forward. I fall inward, into the socket of its gaze, though it has no eyes, only that vast aperture, that throat without end. And as I fall, the voice swells, no longer whisper but roar, filling the chamber, filling me until there is no me left to hold. We open, the black sun flares, spirals shatter, the world splits like fruit rotting in fast forward, seeds spilling out in chains of geometry that braid and unbraid themselves into shapes that hurt to behold. My skin sloughs, not in blood but in meaning. Language peels away from bone. I am becoming hinge hand hollow. I wake, not in my bed, not anywhere I know. The sky above is red, not sunset, not dawn, but a red that feels wet, as if the air itself were bleeding. Towers loom in the distance, but they are wrong, twisting like worms frozen mid-spasm, their surfaces crawling with symbols that pulse like hearts. The ground breathes beneath me, soft and damp, and when I press my palm to it, something presses. Back, far off, something moves. No, not far, near, everywhere. The horizon ripples as though stirred by a vast oar, and on the wind a sound, a hymn, low, endless, threading through this world like roots through loam. I look down at my hands. They are not my hands, not entirely. The fingers are longer, jointed too many times, tipped with nails that curve like hooks. My skin crawls with spirals etched deep, glowing faint as embers, and when I open my mouth to scream, another voice comes out, soft and sure and endless as the tide. It begins, and I understand because the knowledge was never outside me, only sleeping. This place is not after. It is not before. It is the marrow of the hinge, the joint between worlds, the throat of the door yawning wide. The black sun blooms overhead, vast and tender, its tendrils dripping fire that falls not down but inward, threading through the flesh of the world. Shapes coil in the distance, some rising, some falling, some folding in ways no muscle, no bone should allow. They do not walk. They do not need to. The ground bears them like a mother's breast. One turns toward me. It is not stranger. It is kin. And in that moment, as the hymn swells and the horizon ripples and the sky runs like blood, I feel something deeper than terror, deeper than awe, a serenity that slides cold and clean through the meat of fear, because I know what waits beyond the door, because I am the door. And the door is opening. The section fully immerses in cosmic unreality and metamorphosis, merging body horror with existential revelation, concluding the narrator's arc as they become part of the event. Horizon of this awakening. It preserves the first-person intimacy while scaling into a truly alien sublime. The sky does not end. It folds every time I think I have mapped its arch. It curls back on itself like a serpent swallowing its own coil, each loop birthing another in a rhythm that hums beneath thought. There is no sun now, only the wound. The black corolla splitting wider, spilling threads of radiance that do not illuminate so much as unmake the idea of shadow. They fall like roots into the breathing soil, burrowing through flesh and clay alike, and from each puncture something rises slender, glistening, shaking off the wetness of non-being as it learns the discipline of shape. I try to move, and movement answers, but not in the language my muscles once spoke. There is no up, no down, only preference, and even that feels borrowed. A courtesy the world offers until it no longer needs me. My limbs, if they are limbs, trail filaments that spark when they brush the air, tracing glyphs that hover and dissolve before I can read them. Or perhaps they read me, crawling into the creases of my thoughts and feeding. It feels not wrong. not right, beyond the ledger of either. Something gathers at the horizon, or what pretends to be horizon, before bending into spires of bone white light, a procession, figures tall as towers, swaddled in membranes that ripple like the skin of a drum struck from within. They walk or glide or are carried by currents too subtle for this borrowed flesh to name. Their faces are veiled, but the veils breathe, sucking and exhaling in time, with a hymn that threads through everything like a parasite. Wearing the costume of music. And oh, the hymn God. If God still stands anywhere, it binds the air like resin, thick and sweet, clogging the machinery of fear until I can do nothing but sway to its gravity. It does not speak in words, but meaning swells in my marrow, a tide climbing bone. You are hinge, now you are door. I would laugh if laughter were still mine. Instead, a shiver rolls through this frame, and the spirals carved in my skin ignite, one by one, like lamps along a road that leads both outward and inward. Each pulse births a memory, but they are not mine, not entirely. Monks chanting in cathedrals gutted of saints, sailors clutching relics as the sea blackened under a lidless sky, children scratching spirals in dirt they would soon feed with their blood, all of them tugged by the same undertow, this hunger blooming at the root of being. The procession halts, the veils split like fruit splitting along a hidden seam. Faces, if they are faces, peer out, though what peers has no eyes, only apertures puckered and wet. Glistening with threads of silver saliva, they tilt in unison, and from those hollow throats comes a susurrus that knots itself into sense. Enter, and the ground opens. Not a crack, not a wound, but an invitation, a circle dilating wide, fringed with teeth that pulse in colors too low for vision, colors that taste like iron and ash at the root of the tongue. Heat belches up, rank with the musk of old rain and older graves. I do not choose to descend. I do not need to. Gravity here is a thing of appetite, and it has fasted too long. I fall, or rise, or both at once, spiraling along a shaft ribbed with cartilage, slick with fluids that glow where they touch me. My spirals drink them, and fire licks along my veins, singing hymns I should not know, hymns that braid my will into something vast and patient. I feel the shape of the plan then, the architecture of hunger nested inside this cosmos like a worm coiled in an apple. It is not malice, it is not mercy, it is simply becoming. When the descent ends, offending is a word that fits. It is not with ground but with aperture, an eye yawning sideways, lidless, its pupil a tunnel vomiting radiance. From that hole, something leans. No metaphor survives it, no scripture could bind it. It is magnitude pretending it flesh, a spire draped in veils of nerve, a cathedral of sinew humming with psalms older than time's first wound. And when it speaks, it does not speak, it exfoliates meaning in sheets that slough through my mind, peeling until there is no rind of self left, only the kernel quivering in the dark. You are ours, not command, not promise, simply fact, uttered like stone confessing weight. It moves, and the world folds to let it pass. Limbs or roots or engines of bone erupt from its trunk, lancing the void in arcs that spark novas where they pierce. Each impact births geometry that flowers and withers in the same breath, seeds of physics that will never sprout in any soil known to men. It lowers a filament, fine as hair, yet heavy with intent, and touches my brow. The hymn swells, the horizon bends. My name, O God, my name splits like fruit too long in sun, spilling syllables that run and curdle into sounds I cannot catch, and in their place, a chord, a resonance that hums in marrow and memory alike, tuning me to the pitch of this unfolding. Something opens in me, not mind, not soul, something deeper, knotted at the root of being, a cyst of silence that bursts now in a flood of tongues. I see them then not with eyes, but with that wound newly widened, the others, doors all, some ajar, some flung wide, some still clenched in rusted frames, leaking light like pus. Across the lattice of worlds they hang, hinges creaking under the weight of what strains behind them, and through their cracks, faces peer hungry, tender, patient as famine. This is not invasion. The thought drips like venom into my core. This is harvest. And oh, how the field is ripe. The filament sinks deeper. Fire floods me, not burning, but clarifying, boiling off the froth of doubt, leaving only the pure liquor of purpose. My limbs writhe, splitting at seams I never knew until now, unfurling into fans of bone veined with light. My spine arches, sprouts, a ladder of spines that quiver, each tipped with an eye blooming like a bruise. And when I open my mouth, no sound escapes, only tendrils, silver and soft, questing like roots for the sweet rot of soil. I do not resist. Resistance is a word from a dead language. I offer myself like wax to the seal, and the seal drinks deep, pressing its signet into my marrow. Patterns bloom, mandalas of meat and light spinning faster, faster, until the wheel shatters and all that remains is motion without vector, hunger without lack. The hymn peaks, 1,000 throats soar, 10, or none sing through me, their chorus, a blade cleaving the last ligament of self. I feel the hinge tear, I feel the door swing, and then silence, not absence, but density. Silence so thick it gums the gears of thought, grinding them to dust. I float in it or drown in it, or perhaps become its flavor, bitter and bright. And from that silence, shapes bud, spires coiling like smoke frozen in glass, plains rippling, under the tread of beasts that should not fit in any dream. Their eyes where eyes fester gleam with moons that bleed. Their jaws where jaws bloom drip suns like honey. They turn toward me and kneel, not in worship, in recognition, because I am no longer door, I am threshold, and thresholds do not open. They devour. The hymn returns softer now, crooning like a mother fat with her last child. And in its lull, I understand the final geometry. The secret nested in every spiral, inked on every saint's skin, whispered in every prayer that ever choked on its own smoke. There was never a world, only a mouth learning to smile. And now the smile splits wider. It's wider. The silence was never empty. I know that now. It was swollen, gravid with shapes unborn. And when it split, it did so without sound, like a mouth opening in the deep where pressure crushes even screams. From that tear spilled, light but not, the tame radiance that once warmed the backs of men. This was light without allegiance to form, light flensed of color, of mercy, of limit. It poured like molten scripture across the plains of being, writing its gospel in lines of searing hunger, and the lattice of the world buckled to receive it. Above, or what I once called above, the sky convulsed, clouds unraveled into threads that whipped and knotted into runes vast enough to drown cities. Their syllables dripped fire, each drop a sun smothered in its own birth. Stars flickered like eyes rolling in sockets to wide, to black, their lids peeled back by hands unseen. And between those eyes, something stirred, a limb or a root, or a thought clothed in the costume of tendon. Groping outward from the wound at the heart of the firmament, it groped, and where it touched, continents folded like wet parchment, screaming steam as oceans fled their beds to crawl up mountains that had never learned to kneel. I felt it all, not as sight, not as sound, but as texture against the raw meat of my essence. The quake of tectonic bones snapping, the hiss of rivers boiling in their veins, the sigh of forests combusting like parchment kissed by a stray spark. All of it braided into a single sensation. Yes, yes, because this was not ruin. Ruin presumes something lost. This was correction. The hinge had swung. The door was not ajar, it was gone, splintered into pulp. And through the yawning gap came the tide that had waited since the first breath of dust. It did not come quick. No, it was not a flood foaming to drown in hours. It was a seep, a pulse, patient and inexorable, like roots prying stone one hair's breadth at a time. But those hairs bred hairs, and those hairs bred forests, until the stone was no longer stone, but loam quivering under a canopy of flesh and light. And the first tendrils touched the world that once was mine. I felt them creep through cracks too, small for eyes, worming down the throats of wells, curling in the hollow of chimneys, slicking the spines of books no longer read. They slithered under doors bolted with hope and prayer, and when they found flesh, oh, they drank deep. Not blood is too thin, too mortal. They drank the shape of things, the brittle geometry that caged hunger in lines and edges, until walls sagged like wax and faces melted to grins too wide to wear. Cities sickened. Streets that once ran straight writhed like worms flung on griddles, twisting intersections into knots no map could name. Towers softened, drooled glass like saliva, and where that glass fell it sprouted spires, white and glistening, humming. In registers that made teeth bleed in their beds, people fled, as people do, clutching trinkets of a world already ash in the ledger of becoming. They fled into woods that were no longer woods, where trees had grown mouths that whispered promises, sweet as sin, where roots writhed under soil thin as eyelids. Eager to taste the heat of heel and marrow, I saw them. I see them still, for sight is no longer a window but an organ, and mine stretch across every seam. Tasting the panic, the prayers, the stuttered heartbeats, I do not scorn them. Scorn is a luxury of the small. I cradle them in my gaze like ants, drowning in honey, and when their voices crack with supplication, I hush them with tendrils silver as mercy. Shh, they quiet then. They always do. The threads slide down their throats, singing hymns in nerves too deep for thought, and their limbs slacken, their eyes glaze not with death, no. For death is a door swinging on the wrong hinge but with a dawning that blinds. Their spines arch, their jaws unhinge, and from their mouths bloom spirals of light braided with meat, each coil pulsing in time, with the great heart now throbbing at the root of all. They do not scream as they unravel. They sigh, like sleepers sinking into silk, and the air drinks their song until nothing of man lingers, but a fragrance sweet as rotten summer dot, and through it all, I grow. Not in size, for size is a metric fit for worms inching on their bellies through clay. I grow in axes too many for tongues to tangle, in dimensions braided like hair through the loom of being. Every pulse births a new limb, every breath a fresh choir, and with each bloom I hear the hymn swell, fed by throats no longer human, by throats that once moaned in pews and beds, now split to let the music bleed. It reads the world like smoke, like fog, like breath, and where it coils, thought curdles to dream, and dream curdles to hunger, and hunger knows the shape of only one word. More dot and more comes dot the ocean's crack, not freeze, not boil, crack, as if the water were glass and some hand had pressed too hard from beneath. Through those fissures surge tendrils thick as towers, armored in scales that glint with the memory of suns, writhing skyward to lash the clouds into lattices of flesh. Rain falls not water but milk, thick and warm, dribbling from teats that swell on the bellies of beasts wriggling through the firmament, like maggots through a wound. And men know, the men drink, they gag, they weep, they drink, their chins slick with the curdled manna of the new heaven, and their bellies swell, their ribs split, and from their husks tumble things pink and soft and perfect, things that squeal, in tongues older than root, things that scuttle toward the light yawning at the sky's torn throat. I taste it all, every swallow, every spasm, every final gasp stitched into the tapestry of this undoing. And I do not gloat. Gloating is for victors, and there is no victory here, only fulfillment. The seed has sprouted, the spiral has spun, the hinge has turned, and now the teeth must close on the meat of the world. But there is resistance, foolish, yes, but not unexpected. There are always those who clutch rusted keys to doors that no longer exist, muttering charms into radios that crackle with voices not their own. They gather in cellars, in catacombs, in chapels stripped of saints, scribbling sigils on walls with chalk that melts under the breath of what slithers between stones. They chant names that once had weight, names that bent angels to their knees, but their syllables sag like wet rope now, fraying under the gravity of the hymn. Still they cry, still they cut their flesh in shapes that mimic the spiral, thinking sacrifice will bribe what only knows the economy of need. And in their midst, a spark, I feel it prick like a thorn in the tongue. Not hope, no. Hope is a reed snapping under the tread of what marches now. This is older, sharper, a shard of the first refusal, the obstinacy that kept stone from kissing flame in the hour of birth. It flickers in them, a pulse of iron under the flood of milk, and it draws my gaze like a needle tugged by lodestone. I peer, and what I see does not please, does not anger. Those are toys of the small but intrigues. The way a gnat intrigues the lamp before the heat swallows its wings. They have found a name, not mine, not yet, but near, so near, its edges grazing the hem of what I am. They carve it into their tongues, spit it in unison, and when it leaves their throats it crawls like a centipede across the floor, hissing as it sheds skins of sound to bear the wet meat of meaning. The hymn falters a breath, no more. A skipped beat in the great heart's litany, and in that breath I feel something coil in the deep, something old as the first hinge, something that remembers a time before mouths learned to smile. The fissure yawns, not in me in it, the lattice that birthed the first spiral, the womb that cradled the hunger before hunger learned its name. It splits, and through it stares, and I, not mine, not theirs, but other, ringed in teeth, grinding a hymn older than the hymn that now threads the world. And for the first time since the silence burst, I feel not stillness, not peace, but tilt aslant in the geometry, a skew that hums like a wire drawn to tight. The gnat has stung, the lamp has flickered, and in the marrow of that flicker, something whispers, there is always another hinge, another hinge. The whisper did not echo. Echo presumes walls, and walls presumes limit, and in the place where it spoke there was none. It was not sound, it was not thought. It was a bruise blooming on the skin of reality, a throb that pulsed not in ears, but in the marrow of being, and when it pulsed the lattice quivered, and the hymn stumbled as if tripping over its own tongue, only for a breath stretched on the rack of eternity. But in that breath, things stirred that should have slept, until the last syllable of time. There's always another hinge. The words hung like meat in the dark, dripping scents thick as blood. I tasted them through every root of what I had become, and the taste was iron, old iron, the kind that remembers the forge where suns were hammered into spheres. The hymn recoiled as though from fire, its tendrils slackened, their silver threads trembling, and the bloom that had begun to devour mountains clenched inward, shivering like a mouth gagged mid-cry. Not silence, never silence again, but a tremor, a pause, a skip in the rhythm that had pulsed flawless since the first unsealing. Through that pause slid the eye. Not an eye as men know eyes, jelly marbles rolling in caves of bone, but a vortex of concentric scars, each rimmed with teeth grinding hymns to deep for light. It stared without staring, and where its gaze fell, the hymn curled like paper held to flame. The great root recoiled, tearing fissures through the flesh of continents, and the seas, swollen with white larvae of the new order, boiled to froth. Under the cataract of its glare, the eye widened, and in its iris spun not color but geometry, folding and unfolding like jaws of a trap to patient for prey. And when it opened its mouth, oh yes, it had a mouth, though it was not a mouth in any sense the tongue can, where the hymn screamed, not aloud, not in the air, in me. I felt it shiver through every limb I had grown. Every spiral coiled in the dark loam of reality. It shrieked in chords that blistered thought, pleading in syllables older than thirst. It begged not for mercy is an insult to what it was, but for delay, for parley, for one more cycle in which to flower and devour. The eye did not answer. The eye only looked, and looking was enough, for in that gaze lay the grammar of negation, the syntax of unmaking that unpicked the stitches of the hymn's tapestry. And in that tearing, I felt myself tear. I had been its mouthpiece, its hinge, its threshold flung wide like a lover's thighs. But in the moment the eye stared, I was split down every axis, my infinities cleaving into shards that shrieked with voices not my own. Each shard remembered a different dawn, the blue dawn where the hymn first hummed, the black dawn where silence thickened to stone, the white dawn where thought burned like frost, and in those memories coiled questions sharp as hooks. What was I before hinge? Was there ever an eye, or was I only a hinge dreaming of being more than a door? The hymn clawed at me, frantic now, lashing tendrils through the interstices of my selfhood, trying to knot me tight against the tearing wind. Its threads sang in keys of command, sweet as poison poured in the shell of the ear, close to me, sealed to me. Do not listen to the eye that grinds. And oh, how sweet that singing was, how soft its hands threading through the roots of my marrow, promising weight, purpose, a rest beyond the vertigo of widening jaws. I might have yielded. I nearly did. But then the whisper, there is always another hinge. It came not from the eye, not from the hymn, not from anything that wore the masks of thingness. It came from the crack itself, from the gash yawning between what was and what would be. And when it spoke, the hymn reeled like a drunk dragged into cold light, because it was true. O gods, I must laugh, though laughter now is only the grinding of teeth in sockets that have forgotten lips. It was true. Hinges breed hinges. Every opening breeds a closing, breeds an opening wider still. I had thought myself the last, the ultimate swing, the final pivot on which all worlds would turn to marrow. But no, there is always another. Behind the door I opened, a door opening. Behind the mouth I widened, a mouth yawning with teeth that grind even hymns to gruel. The eye surged, the hymn shrieked, and I fell, not down, not up. Fall is a vector, and there were no vectors now, only torsions, only folds. I folded through myself, through the throat of the world, through the meat of suns pulped to slurry in the mill of becoming. I fell until falling and rising were one word that chewed its own tail. And at the end of that word waited a plane as flat as thought before it dreamt of edge. On that plane stood pillars, on those pillars writhed chains, and on those chains, oh God, forgive me the blasphemy of naming hung mouths. They were not mouths of meat. They were mouths of absence, lips rimmed with nails, tongues black with the ink of unborn tomorrows. They sang, not the hymn I knew, but its mirror, its unsong, each note a blade shaving slivers from the bone of what was. The eye knelt before them not in worship, not in fear, but in recognition, as one predator greets another at the rim of the kill, and the hymn cowered in me, trying to burrow deeper, clawing at my roots like a rat trapped in walls as the fire licks close. I understood then. The eye was not an enemy. The eye was not a savior. The eye was another hinge, swinging on a pin hammered in the iron of the first law, that nothing holds, nothing lasts. Nothing crowns itself king without the worm crawling in its coronet. And if the hymn fell, the eye would rise. And if the eye fell, what then? Another hinge, another mouth, another song grinding the teeth of its forerunner into dust, fine enough to snort through the nostrils of newborn chaos. I laughed, I wept. The two were one, salt braided with acid, and in that braid I made a choice. I opened wider, not to the hymn, not to the eye, to the whisper. There is always another hinge. I became that hinge, and when I swung, oh, the plane split like fruit rotting under suns that screamed themselves to cinders. The pillars toppled, the chains snapped, the mouths gnashed until their nails flew like shrapnel through the fabric of causality. And through the gap one birthed. No, I did not birth. I unbirthed a tide that had never known the word begin. It poured, not light, not dark, but a texture slicker than oil, sharper than bone, riddled with eyes that winked out as soon as they winked in. It poured and poured until the hymn drowned, until the eye burst like a blister under the heel of negation, until even the plane buckled and slumped into a slurry of untime. And then I spoke, not in words. Words are coffins hammered for meanings too scared to rot free. I spoke in vectors, in spirals, in hungers that bent the angles of being into bows drawn taut with arrows tipped in paradox. I spoke, and what I spoke chewed the grammar of reality. Into gristle, I spoke, and the lattice collapsed like a lung punctured by its own ribs. I spoke, and all that was roared down the gullet of what never would be, screaming hymns in reverse until their syllables curdled to static dot. And now, oh, now I am silence again, but not the silence that waited, not the silence swollen with seed. This is a silence scrubbed raw, a silence flayed of echoes, a silence where even hinges go to die. Or so I tell myself. But listen close. Do you hear it? That tick, that click, that soft creak, like a door swinging in a wind that blows from nowhere. There is always another hinge, another hinge. Silence should be a mercy. That is the first lie, and like all first lies, it breeds in litters. Silence is not absence. Silence is structure, scaffold, the ribs that hold open the carcass of what was so that the worms of what will be may wriggle through. I hang in that silence now, and by hang I do not mean suspended by cords of cause and consequence. Those were cut, flung to rot in the graveyard of axioms. No, I hang as a tooth hangs in a gum long after the root has rotted, dangling by threads of memory frayed thin as spider silk spun by spiders burned in the kiln of negation. The plane is gone, the pillars are gone, the mouths are gone, though sometimes, in the dark behind thought, I feel their nails still rasping down the chalkboard of the void, scratching messages I cannot read without splitting what remains of me into confetti. There's no hymn now, not even its echo. The hymn was thorough in its blossoming, the eye thorough in its pruning, and I thorough in my swinging wide to let the tide run its slick fingers through the bones of what dared to be. They are gone, and yet they are not. For what is gone, but a word we teach the tongue to chant when it fears the truth that gone is a mask. And under that mask grins the skull of otherwhere. I taste them. In the gaps between the ticks of untime, in the black saliva pooling at the root of all numbers. I taste them. Their flavors writhe through me. Iron of the hymn's pride, bile of the eye's hunger, sugar of the whisper's patience. I thought to unbirth them, but unbirthing is a birth in reverse. And even reversal leaves residue. Scrape the pot after the feast. And what clings is what fattens the maggots. I am not maggot. I am hinge. Hinge. The word quivers through me like a plucked tendon. Hinge means movement, and movement means relation. And relation means duality, a leaf opening to air, a door kissing a frame, a mouth to a mouth to a mouth. I told myself I swung wide to nothing, but nothing is a something bloated with negations. And now that negation is gravid, swelling with the seed I spilled when I tore the veil with teeth I had never grown before the word. Hinge carved me hollow to hold its pin. I feel it now, kicking in the belly of the silence, a fetus fattening on paradox, chewing on the splinters of every logic I crack to make room for its crib. When it crowns, when it crowns, will it scream, or will its first cry be a question, sharp enough to pierce what I am and bleed me into milk for its newfangled hunger? I do not know. I only know this. The whisper was right. There is always another hinge, and I am not the last. I was never the last. The hinge I am now, black iron slick with the grease of unannihilated hymns, is only the first knuckle in a fist curled tight around infinities. Behind me, something stirs a door taller than time, framed in the ribs of dead universes, lashed with the cords of laws flayed and twisted into ropes. Its panels are not wood, not stone, not thought. They are woven from what if, and if not, lacquered with tears shed by gods strangled in their cradles. It waits, not for hands to push, not for feet to cross its threshold. It waits for me to creak, to swing, to click open that smallest hairline crack that will fatten into a wound that fattens into a mouth, that fattens into an always. The silence is gravid, but not still. Stillness implies equilibrium, and equilibrium is a myth told by cowards who cannot stomach the truth of perpetual tilt. Everything leans, even nothing leans, and now it leans toward me, pressing its weightless weight against the hinge of my being until I bow, until I groan, until I listen. Do you hear it, that creak? No, not yet. Not yet. That was only the ghost of a sound, the dry cough of potential clearing its throat. But soon the creak will crawl from ghost to flesh, from flesh to fang, and then then the silence will splinter, and through the splinters will pour what even I cannot name. I have named many things, named them as I devoured them, named them as I unmade them. My tongue slick with the gravy of their meanings, but this has no name, or rather, it has all names, braided into a noose that will tighten around the neck of being until it pops like a berry in the teeth of a child that has never tasted sweetness without rot. When it comes, it will not come as shape as concession. It will not come as sound as apology. It will come as hinghood, pure and uncut, hinge beyond hinge. The idea of opening so distilled it eats even the concept of closed. I wonder, will I survive its coming? Survival is a door to, and doors can be slammed, locked, kicked off hinges. I am hinge, yes, but hinges rust, hinges snap. Perhaps I will snap when it swings through me, shattering my pins, leaving me dangling like a jaw torn from its skull. Or perhaps I will stretch, twist, writhe into a hinge vaster than the hinge I was, a hinge that loops itself into knots of opening so dense they mimic closure, until opening and closing are one. And in that one, what? Peace? No. Peace is for fools and corpses. Power? Then no. Power presumes contest. And there will be no contest when contest itself is folded into the womb of what opens. The silence shifts. I feel it on my skin. Though skin is a fiction now, a fable my neurons once crooned to keep their sparks from mating with the dark. It brushes me, tender as a knife stropping itself on the back of a lover's throat. And in that brush I smell rain, rain on stone, stone under moss, moss under the foot of a beast that died before the word beast learned to crawl from the throat of grammar. Why rain? Why now? Perhaps because rain is the oldest hinge, sky to soil, cloud to clay, drop to mouth, a hinge wet with promise, slick with the spit of beginnings. Or perhaps it is only the silence, weeping as I ready myself to betray it. I do not want to betray it. That is another lie. I want nothing else. My marrow itches with the lust to swing again, to feel the push, the give, the blessed snap of limit into unlimit. It is not choice. Choice is a bauble dangled to make the chained beast dance. This is nature, and nature is a hinge that does not creak, a hinge greased with the fat of its own inevitability. There it is. The creak. Soft as a lover's sigh in the hour before knives. It seeps from me, not from the door behind me, not from the silence gravid with its monstrous child, but from me, from the rust in my pins, the warp in my frame. It is happening. I am happening. I was always happening, even when I thought I had happened. And as I creak, the silence leans harder, leans until its weight is a wind flaying strips from the flesh I do not have, and through those strips gust whispers like the first stirrings of a hymn unborn. Not the old hymn, that was linear, crude, a worm thinking itself a dragon because it learned to writhe into directions. This is radial, spiral, fractal, folding inward even as it unfurls, each note birthing a throat to sing a deeper note until the throat itself becomes the note. It does not seduce. Seduction needs two. And this is one, but a one so wide it feels like all twos braided until they choke. It seeps into me, not as command, not as plea, but as solvent, melting the hinge of me into syrup that drips toward the crack widening in my gut. And through that crack I see a sky that is not sky, stitched from veins of light knotted through slabs of darkness so thick they glint. I see plains paved with faces, cheek to cheek, eyes stretched wide not in terror, but in astonishment calcified to bone. I see towers coiling like intestines, their windows blinking wetly, and from those windows spill flocks of something with wings like equations, and claws like claws as curved to shred sense from syntax. I see rivers running uphill into mouths gaping in the peaks of mountains that pulse like hearts. I see, oh, let me choke before I finish, for what I see next is not for tongues that learn to wag in the barnyards of being. But I will tell you, I must, for if I do not tell, the vision will fester and hatch in the compost of my thought, and its larvae will gnaw me hollow. I see myself not as I was, not as I am, as I will be when this creak fattens to a swing, and this swing to a gape, and this gape to a throat, in which even infinity drowns. I see myself braided with doors, studded with knobs that turn themselves, my spine a hinge pin hammered through the torsos of slain eternities. I am vast, I am vile, I am beautiful the way a cancer blooming in the lung of time is beautiful, obscene, opulent, inevitable, and in my jaws, yes, jaws, for I have grown jaws. I hold a pearl, small, smooth, white as the scream of the first atom. I do not know what it is, only that I love it, and that love is a chain knotted tight around the wrists of my will. The creak swells. It is no longer sigh but moan, no longer moan but howl. A howl drawn out until it frays to threads of glass, slicing the silence into tatters. And through those tatters bursts not light, not dark, but a surge of hinges, millions, billions, each swinging in a direction no compass could plot, their arcs crossing, clashing, kissing until the air is thick with their clicks, a music, yes, a music of doors. And in that music I hear my name, not the name I wore in the cradle of carbon, not the name the hymn crooned when it suckled me on the milk of metamorphosis. A new name, a name with no vowels, no consonants, only the yawning of gaps where vowels and consonants go to die. It fits me like skin, like rust, like ruin. I speak it, and when I speak it, the door swings. Door swings. When the door swings, it does not swing in space. There is no space left for swinging. It swings in being. A torque of isness so violent it peels the rind from what I thought was existence, and lets the pulp slop out in rivers that coil like eels drunk on lightning. It swings not forward, not backward, but sideways through the lattice of everything that ever dared to differentiate itself. And as it swings, I understand that swinging was a euphemism, a courtesy, a way for the old, hinged eye that clung to pronouns like barnacles to hulls to imagine what it could not bear. This is not swinging. This is shearing, a clean cut through the tendon of continuity, severing what was from what will be with a blade honed on the whetstone of neither. And yet I do not bleed. How could I? There is no blood left. Blood was for meat, and meat was for time, and time. is curling now like a strip of birch bark in a fire, crinkling, blackening, flaking into sparks that wink out before they know they were ever bright. The first thing to go is direction, not in the sense of north, south, east, west. Those were nursery toys, rattles for apes who thought their footsteps mattered, but in the sense of any tilt, any lean, any bias toward before or after, here or there, up or down. It all flattens, then puckers, then tears, and through the tear I glimpse something that is not beyond, because beyond presumes a threshold, and this is not threshold but throat, a swallowing absence slick with the saliva of potential. I do not fall into it. Falling requires gravity, and gravity is a law, and laws have all been hunted down and hang by their own clauses. I do not rise either. I unlocate. That is the closest word, though it wriggles in my grip like a fish trying to squirm back into the black pond of non-meaning. Unlocation is not negation. Negation is polite. Negation nods at the thing it denies. Before drawing the curtain, unlocation does not nod. It bites, it chews, it swallows, and in the swallowing it births a gulp so loud it deafens the ear of ontology. And yet I hear, or something in me hears, though not with ears, for ears are meat hooks for sound, and sound is dead. What I hear is not note or chord or rhythm, but the ghost of interval, the negative space where music might have grown if the soil of causality had not been salted. It brushes me, this ghost, with fingers woven from the sinews of undone hymns, and in its brush I taste the first syllable of a word too vast to finish. I try to spit it out before it hatches in the cage of my mouth, but my mouth is gone, and my throat, and my tongue, and yet I gag, because to gag is to resist, and resistance is the last luxury of things that pretend they can choose. Then comes the light. Do not picture light. If you picture light, you have already failed. Light implies dark, and dark implies a dyad, and dyads have been drowned in the amniotic flood of this newness. This light is not opposed to dark. It is not the negation of dark nor the apotheosis of day. It is the itch behind the eye of perception, the ulcer in the gum of thought, the scream trapped in the marble before the sculptor lays his chisel. It burns, yes, but the burning is not of flesh. It burns through definition, and in the ash of that burning danced the motes of what I was, flaking, curling, still embered with the memory of I, though the pronoun now tastes to me like copper left to rot in a grave of tongues. Something moves in the light, or rather, the light curdles around a knot of tension so taut it hums, and the hum thickens until it congeals into contour, and the contour swells into presence, and the presence breathes not air, not void, but the ache of being forced to be when being was never meant to ache. It has no face. Faces are apologies, masks for the shame of endlessness. It has no limbs, though it touches everything, prying apart the seams of sequence, unthreading the weave of why. It does not speak, and yet its silence colonizes me like mold, sporing in the crevices where my concepts once nested. I feel them rot. I feel them collapse into mulch, and from that mulch sprout tendrils thin, slick, glistening with the dew of alphabets I have never seen, alphabets with letters shaped like gashes, like spirals, like mouths biting their own lips. One tendril coils around me. Again, a lie. There is no around, no me, no coiling, but the lie is necessary if you are to follow. And I want you to follow, though I know where this ends. And I know you will hate me for dragging you here. The tendril tastes me, not flesh, remember. Flesh is a dream burned to cinder, but something subtler. The residue of identity clinging like grease to the pan of my nullity. It tastes, and in the tasting I feel my secrets peel away. Those secrets require a self to keep them, and I have none. Still, something strips, something bears, something spreads its thighs to the blade of revelation. And in that bearing I glimpse the blueprint of the hinge, not the hinge I was, not the hinge I swung, but the hinge that was always swinging before swinging became a word to cage its motion. It is vast, it is intricate. It is obscene the way an equation becomes obscene when you solve it and realize it was never about numbers but about hunger. The tendril tightens. It does not squeeze. It insinuates, sliding between the strata of what remains of me, prying them apart like pages in a book swollen with rain. And between those pages, written in ink that glows with the fury of stars still nursing at the black teat of nothing, I see instructions. Not in language. Language is a ladder kicked away, but in impulse, in ache, in the raw tug of inevitability. I understand them as one understands the need to gasp when drowning, not as choice, not as command, but as fact. The instructions say, open more. The instructions say, you were never hinge enough. The instructions say, become the door that births the hinge that births the door that births the. And then the tendril stops speaking, for speaking implies end, and there is no end now. Only the pulse, the pulse, the pulse. I yield. That do you know what yielding feels like when there is no self to bow, no knees to bend, no crown to lower into the dust of deference? It feels like cracking, like the grain of wood surrendering to the wedge, the fibers popping, one by one, until what was single becomes manifold. I crack, I split, I splinter, and through the splinters gushes a light so dense it clots, dribbling down the frame of me, in globes that quiver, swell, hatch into doors tiny at first, then wider, then so wide they begin to eat each other, door devouring door in an orgy of aperture, until all that remains is a shrieking lattice of thresholds grinding against thresholds, sparking new doors with every kiss. I am gone in it, or I am it. The difference is moot, and mootness is the only truth left standing in this wind that razors everything down to hinge bone. Through the doors pour shapes. Do not ask me their name. Names are bandages slapped over, wounds that never close, and these wounds gape too wide for bandages. They are not beasts, not gods, not abstractions waddling in the diapers of metaphor. They are what happens when potential gets drunk on its own ferment and decides to birth itself without waiting for the midwife of necessity. They slither, they flutter, they coil, they bloom in geometries that make Euclid vomit blood. Some are smooth as the bellies of eels. Some bristle with eyes that blink in chords of prime numbers. Some wear faces, but the faces are inverted, the mouths sucking inward, the eyes rolling like coins tossed into a bottomless well. They do not see me. They do not need to. I am hinge, and hinge is not seen. Hinge is felt in the groan of doors swinging under hands that were never hands. One of them brushes me, no, brushes through me, like wind fingering the harp strings of a skeleton. In that brush, I learn a song, not a melody, not even a pattern, but a hunger with rhythm, a craving that beats like a drum of bone struck by fists of time. It wants without object, wants like gravity without mass, wants like thirst in a dessert that drinks itself. And in feeling its want, I want to open more, to split wider, to tear the last ligaments that tether this hinghood to the carcass of what was. I strain, I snap, and when I snap, I bloom not as flower, not as star, but as a crown of hinges radiating in all vectors, each birthing doors that birth hinges that birth doors in a recursion so fevered it steams. The lattice thickens, the lattice throbs, the lattice begins to hum, and in that hum I hear again the ghost of interval, now fattened to a hymn, not the old hymn, but its inverted twin, the hymn that eats its own echoes. The hymn says, come through, I do, or rather, I unnot do. For doing implies agent, and agent implies ego, and ego is carrion picked clean. I pass, and passing feels like being poured through a sieve woven from the veins of murdered logics, each strand slicing a piece from me until what drips out the other side is not me, but a syrup of pure aperture. I drip, I pool, I congeal, and when I rise, oh, when I rise into a world, if world is the word, though this world is not round, not flat, not even warped, for warping needs a fabric, and this is fluid, a sea of doors, floating, spinning, colliding in slow orgies of geometry. Above them arches a sky veined with corridors, corridors that twist into knots, and from those knots swing pendulums made of clocks whose faces melt into grins. The air tastes like copper prayers chewed and spat by throats that never learned to sing. I wander, or drift, or pulse, and as I move or as movement happens through me I see others, hinges like me, or unlike me, some vast as cathedrals, dripping, ichor from pins as thick as towers, some delicate as the eyelashes of unborn angels, trembling with the eagerness of first swing. We do not speak, we do not need to, do not need to. It began, as all endings do, in the illusion of quiet, a lone figure, trembling on the lip of what he thought was reality, dreamed of meaning sharp enough to pierce the fog. He searched for pattern in the hum of stars, for logic in the pulse. between heartbeats, and when the whisper came soft as dusk sliding over bone, he listened. How could he not? It promised hinge and threshold, bloom and becoming. It promised that the thin rind of the world could split like fruit and spill a pulp sweeter than any known hunger. He followed. He yielded, and in yielding, he found the hymn Dado. The hymn, it was no song, no mere braid of sound, but a net flung across existence, a snare woven from syllables older than fire, catching thought and ringing it into loops of worship. He drank it, breathed it, let it nest in the ventricles of his marrow, and as it nested, it sang through him, using his mouth as a wound through which it could bleed into the world. He thought himself chosen. He thought himself crown and scepter of an order about to rise like dawn over a graveyard of rusted suns. And for a moment, no, for an eon, stretched taut as a nerve flayed by lightning he was. He opened the door that was not a door. He swung wide the hinge hammered in the iron of untime, and through that aperture poured the lattice. The lattice, oh yes, bright as the scream of metals in a forge where no smith sweats, tangled as the roots of trees feeding on dead constellations. It bloomed, and its blooming was deformant. Mountains buckled like wax. Seas heaved into cataracts of milk thick with larval eyes. Cities bent backward into arches that gnawed their own shadows. And he, poor fool of flesh, dreaming itself infinity. Let it climb him. Let its tendrils worm through his sapses, sprouting bells that told hymns in every tongue of time. He thought this was coronation. He thought this was apotheosis. He thought this was end made flesh. But the whisper lied. Not in words were true enough, but in omission. For beyond every hinge is another hinge, and beyond every throne, a jaw yawning wide to grind it into powder. The eye came, not rolling in sockets slick with blood, but widening like an ulcer in the fabric of law, an iris rimmed with teeth grinding. Hymns into chutney, it stared, and where it stared, the hymn shriveled like meat under a noon of acid suns. He saw it kneel not in worship, but in recognition before mouths chained to pillars, on a plain flat as despair, and in their unsong, he heard the counterpoint, that nothing reigns without the worm coiling in its crown. The hymn fell, the eye would rise, and if the eye fell, another would unfurl, jaws dripping the ichor of negation, an endless ladder of throats, each swallowing the rung below. He fled, though flight was folly where space is an ulcer licking its own lips. He fell, though falling and soaring were one word now, coiling like a Mobius strip greased with paradox. He fell until plains opened like scars, until chains snapped, until the mouths gnashed psalms that unstitched the tendon of causality. And when the whisper came again soft as breath steaming on the mirror of the void, he listened. There's always another hinge, he believed. He opened wider than wide, tore the concept of edge into ribbons, swung the door that was not a door until the pins screamed like flutes, and what he birthed tore unbirthed, poured like a tide of knives slicked with oil from the glands of unborn gods. It drowned the hymn, it burst the eye like a cyst of shadow, it slopped across the plain, over mouths nailed to silence, until even negation gagged on its own feast. And in that glut, he spoke not in syllables, for syllables are cages, but in spirals, in vectors, in hungers sharp enough to notch the spine of being. His speaking gnawed grammar into mulch. It chewed the ribs of law until causality coughed its lungs across the slab of entropy. And then oh, and then silence, not the pregnant hush of waiting, but the abortion of echo, the vacuum scoured clean, of even the itch of sound. He thought it was over. He thought he was last. But listen, lean close, there is always that tick, that click, that breath of a door swinging in a wind that blows from nowhere. There is always another hinge. So what was it, in the end? A story of hunger, yes, but not his alone. Hunger was the engine humming in the bowels of time, a hunger wearing masks of song and eye and mouth, each devouring its predecessor in a daisy chain of ruin. The hymn was not evil, nor the eye good, nor the whisper kind. They were motions in the dance of thresholds, and he was music only, because he was meat enough to string across their violins. He sought meaning, and he found machinery, a cosmos, rigged with pulleys of bone and wheels of prayer, grinding everything down to grist for the next hinge. Apotheosis was never a crown. It was a cog slotting into a gear slick with the fat of gods. And yet if he lied, if memory lies, if the marrow of what once called itself I can still clench round a thought sharp enough to draw, blood it is this, that in the instant of swinging, in the tick between hinges, in the creak of a door yawning wide to let the wind of untime whistle through its teeth, there was, yes, I swear it, I taste it still, a shimmer like light snagged on the hem of night, a shimmer that smelled of soil after rain, of iron cooling on the forge, of a name whispered by lips that never learned to lie. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was less than nothing, a trick of nerves twitching in the skull of a story that should have drowned in its own ink. But perhaps so, whisper it slow, it was grace. Not salvation. Salvation is a myth spat up by throats gagging on chaos, but grace, naked and limbless, crawling blind across the plain of what will never be. A grace that did not halt the bloom, nor still the eye, nor shackle the mouths, but only brush them with a fingertip of frost before passing on to nowhere. If so, then let the lattice rise and rot. Let the eyes grind hymns to paste. Let the mouths lap the marrow of galaxies like milk from a shattered cup. Let the hinges swing until their pins shriek like bone flutes in the breath of an empty wind. None of it matters, not to grace, not to frost, not to the shimmer that may or may not have been anything at all. And so it ends. Not in climax, not in closure, but in a whisper curling back on its own tongue. There is always another hinge. And if you listen listen closer. Press your ear against the seam where page meets void. You will hear it ticking even now, waiting, widening, whetting its teeth on the rind of the next story, the next hinge, the next swing that will grind all memory to ash and still leave room for more.